Hey there! Thanks for tuning in to today's episode of the Sidebar Media Podcast. Our guest today is the founder of DeeperBlue.com, Stephan Wheelan. Stephan started DeeperBlue as a blog and chat room in 1996 while in college, and over time, it has turned into a leading digital destination. It covers all things related to scuba diving, freediving, spearfishing, and ocean conservation. The site contains the insight and experience of over 300 staff and volunteers, one of which is my co-host and husband, Robbie. So let's dive in. You got it, right? As we chat with Stephan, our across-the-pond dive buddy and founder of this amazing digital resource, DeeperBlue.com. This is the Sidebar Media Podcast with your host, Robbie and Nicole Harper, where we tell the stories of those who tell the stories.
All right. Well, welcome to the next episode of the Sidebar Media Podcast. And today we are joined by a friend of mine, Stephan Wheelan, who is the owner and founder of DeeperBlue.com, which is a scuba diving industry publication. Stephan, welcome.
Robbie, Nicole, thanks for having me.
We're glad you're here.
Yes, definitely glad you're here. And so first thing, we're all on this group here are scuba divers. And how did you get into scuba diving, Stephan?
Well, it's an interesting story. Well, it's interesting to me. I don't know what's interesting to anyone else, but so I was on holiday with my parents when I was 8 years old. Because apparently you have to go away with your parents when you're 8. You're not allowed to go by yourself. That's
typically
real challenge, right? And I was in the Canary Islands, which is just off the coast of Africa, Spanish Islands, and I'm sitting around a pool, bored, because my parents were wanting to sunbathe and chill out, and I wanted to get up and run around and do all the things that 8-year-old boys want to do.
Which now sounds like the ideal vacation, right? Sit around the pool and do nothing.
Exactly.
It does. And I've got 3 young daughters, so sitting around by the pool doesn't happen at all these days. But yeah, so this person turned up with all this kind of weird stuff, these air tanks and you know these things they put in their mouth and some. What I would have described at the time, flippers and all this stuff. I'm like, wow, this looks pretty cool. And he walked around, and I've got photos of it, actually. And the guy looks like a Cousteau. He's got this I think like a Jean-Philippe Cousteau or something. He's got this like grey, whitish hair, really long, flowing. It looks very... I think he was actually French as well, which, I mean, in my head, he was French. That's the memory I have. And he walked around the pool and goes, anybody want to try scuba? And I was like, yeah, sure, that sounds good. And I looked over at my parents and they were like, thank goodness we can get rid of him for, a little while out of our hair and give him something to do. So I got all kitted up and, I think I was looking back over some old photos. I actually have old photos of this and, it's just a picture of me and then I'm there in my Speedos, pretty much the last time I could actually wear Speedos. And then I put on, it was just, cylinder with a back plate and it was a regulator and they chucked a couple of fins on my feet and chucked me in the water and you sank to the bottom and swam around the pool. And I remember thinking to myself, this is awesome. This is really, really cool. And I can't believe I'm getting to do this, right? And I remember looking up, and it was only supposed to be 5-10 minutes. It wasn't a long time underwater. And I remember looking up at the surface and the person was giving me the sort of come up signal. And I pretended I didn't see it and just looked down again and swam around. They actually had to send someone down to the bottom of the pool to come and get me. So
you were a thief.
A thief, absolutely. But, it's I loved it so much, right? And and how little did I know at 8 years old that it would become such a major part of my life and become instrumental in me, helping educate and inspire so many people to do similar things over the years. So yeah, but it was, 8 years old, something cool to do whilst on holiday with your parents.
I love this because today it would be like, well, we're going to need you to sign 15 waivers and your parents would be like, I don't know if he's background checked. And this, and they were just like, whatever. It was a beautiful time. Like, just send your children. They're fine. Strap something on them. They'll be back.
Yeah, and literally no idea. I don't think my parents even paid attention to what was going on. They were just like, oh, good, someone's looking after him for half an hour.
Bring me another margarita. Someone bring me another one. Stephen's fine.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah. And so, I guess now what maybe an even more important question was, when's the last time you went diving?
Actually, it's not as long ago as it's a long time from anyone who doesn't live in the water. But for me, it was sort of tail end of October. I was in the Red Sea.
Ooh,
okay.
I was very lucky. We had a boat we went on liverboards down into the deep south of Egypt, diving off the coast into the middle of the Red Sea. Absolutely fantastic liverboard. Did it for a week. We had a whole bunch of people in the diving industry, all friends. Basically, it's all friends. But if anyone had torpedoed that boat, there would have been several people missing in the diving industry.
Yeah, really. There was a lot of names on that boat.
Including several media people on the boat. So they in one fell swoop, they could have taken out about 50 to 60% of the diving media organizations.
I can only imagine the stories that were being told on this liveaboard for the week. Some of them true.
Well, exactly. And one of them, Mark Evans, who's the publisher and publishing director of Scuba Diver magazine. Magazines. There's several of them all over the world. He's a very, very dear friend of mine. He's one of my best friends, and we were regaling lots of people with lots of stories about us over the years diving in various locations. And I mean, the après diving stuff was probably more interesting than the actual diving itself.
Do you get to? Diving in the UK. I mean, I can imagine it's not much like diving in Egypt in the Red Sea at all. Do you get to go diving at home much, or do you just not prefer to?
I mean, I love diving in the UK. It's people I think assume, especially people who live in nicer climes like in Egypt or Florida or those sorts of places, that you can go diving in much nicer environments. It's beautiful to go diving. Yeah, it's cold, and yes, it can be murky on occasion, but you just wear the right equipment. You wear dry suits instead of wetsuits, and if you choose the right place at the right time, you can get some amazing visibility. And there are coral reefs that you can go and dive. Not many of them, but there are some coral reefs that you can dive off the UK. There's amazing wrecks. There's amazing wildlife that you can go and see. There's whale sharks, dolphins, all sorts of different fish that you can see. It's lovely. And if you want to go training, lots of people go training in inland quarries as well in the UK rather than going to the sea. So there's probably, I'd say, half a dozen to a dozen different places you can go around the UK. I actually, when I was at university, lived about 10 minutes away from one of the biggest UK inland sites called Stony Cove. So I was running my university dive club at the time. So I'd be there pretty much every day. I was there probably 5-6 days a week, going and diving in a quarry. So when someone says to me now, I'd like to go diving just to get checked out again, check my kit, got some new kit. Let's go to Stony Cove. I'm like, I've done like 600 dives in that place. I really have no interest in going in there at all. Mm-hmm. But I think for me, it's at the moment, work, life, family, everything is really busy. So taking time out to take a comprehensive week to go and do diving a couple of times a year is pretty much all I get to do. I get to talk about it and write about it and, meet people in the industry and do stuff around diving all the time. But actual diving once or twice a year now.
Well, you said that you got started diving very young age and really kind of got into it when you were at university. And tell us how DeeperBlue got started. It is a very successful industry news site and publication that it's very difficult to, it's maybe not difficult to start a website or a blog or something like that, but to have it sustained over all of these years. Tell us how that got started.
Yeah. So we talked about me being 8, and when I was very lucky when I was at school, I actually managed to then go into. I became certified at 13, which is the youngest you could be certified in the UK system at the time. I was an instructor at 16.
Oh, wow.
So gone all through and got all my badges. I think at the time it was more about collecting badges on my. But I'd upgraded to swim shorts as opposed to Speedos by this point because I couldn't fit into my Speedos. But getting the badges and so on. And I mean, I loved it. I was very, very passionate about it, and I was all going all in to learn everything I could about being a diving professional, doing those things. And when I got to university, so 18 years old, going to university, I had all these stories by this point because I'd already been an instructor for a couple of years. I mean, teaching on school trips and things like this. It wasn't like I was out working in a dive center somewhere doing this sort of stuff. But I had the opportunity. I was very, very lucky. I had the opportunity to go to various places overseas and go diving and experience, and sometimes with my friends, sometimes with the school, sometimes we were sponsored by there's a military cadet force at schools here in the UK called the Combined Cadet Force. So it was sponsored by our section. The diving bit was sponsored by the Navy, unsurprisingly. Although I was in the Air Force, that was my I chose the Air Force track rather than the Navy track. So I got to take lots of other students, go and try diving, do all this sort of different things, and got to university, and I was doing sort of business and computing were the two sort of majors that I had. And the computing track, they had what was then called multimedia. This was 1996, so it was called multimedia, which covered a whole multitude of sins. And one of the modules was creating a website. Now, this wasn't what people these days think about creating a website.
Oh, no. I remember doing that in college, too, and being like, this thing stinks compared to what's today.
Exactly. So it's like you go and, these days you go and you click a couple of buttons and put your credit card information in and you've got a fully working website, right? And in those days, you learned how to code HTML, and you had to resize your images manually, and you had to figure out how to embed and upload an image separately onto, a site using FTP and, all sorts of different, really. It was a wild west, really early days of the internet. In fact, most people who would have been using any sort of internet-like thing in those days would have been either through the university using the internet, or they would have been using things like AOL or CompuServe, or those sort of gated communities that existed in the sort of late 90s. The ones that used to get sort of CD-ROMs in the front of magazines and through the post, and those things that they'd get you to install something on your computer, and then you'd snake your modem cable out from your room where your computer is to wherever the phone socket was in the house.
And it'd make a noise.
The old AOL discs.
Yep.
Kids these days, they don't even know.
Exactly.
And I'm so old when I say that, and I'm fine.
So it was like, so what I did is I created a website to do with diving. And it was, I mean, these days you call it a blog. It was, personal stories about diving. And because it was so early on in the internet or the World Wide Web, it was people would start finding it. It would be on things like Yahoo and various directories, because we didn't have Google in those days. You had to actually physically get listed somewhere for someone to be able to go and find you. And people started finding the site, and they're like, it was DeeperBlue.net in those days. And it was .net because as a poor student, a .com domain cost a little bit more money. It was like $100 more to get a .com than .net. And I was like, I don't quite have the money to do it now, so I'll wait. And by the time I actually got the domain name, by the time I could afford the domain name DeeperBlue.com, it had gone, and it was some sort of blues or jazz musician band, and it was for pretty much 15 years. It lasted until I acquired the domain name in like 2010, 2011, something like that. It was a jazz blues website,
also very cool, but just different.
Different, exactly. So it was DeeperBlue.net was born, and it was people started saying, look, I love your articles. They're really cool and interesting. I've got a couple of stories. Would you mind publishing a couple of my stories? And almost de facto, without any effort or trying to, I became a publisher. It was, looking back on it, it's really strange, real wild west of stuff. And in fact, we've got articles. I go back and sometimes look at some of the articles, the very, very early ones. And there are people who are fairly well known in the diving industry who've, published articles on the website talking about some pretty cool, interesting stuff. There was one of our most popular articles is about the giant Humboldt squid. And I can't remember the name of the chap now. He's actually he's at DEMA quite a few times, the big trade show that we have for the diving industry. Mm-hmm. He has published a whole load of different things. And one of his first articles ever published was on DeeperBlue. And it's pretty much once or twice a year, something about some giant squid piques people's interest on the internet. And we get a whole bucket load of traffic of people looking at, giant Humboldt squid article on DeeperBlue. And that's one that was published in 97, I think, 98, something like that.
That's so random and so cool that people just keep coming back to it. It's there forever, kids. The internet is always there. Like what you put out there is there.
Exactly.
Wow. Well, I mean, it sounds like you started it back when this, like the blog 1.0 world was there. When you first started hearing about bloggers, that it was about in that time frame, and even before that, it was, what was it? It was like just community chats and forums and that kind of thing. I mean, this was like way before anything blogging or web development is today. So it just, I'm putting that time frame in my mind. That was way back when you just first started hearing the word blogger.
Yeah, I mean, we predate that, even that, right? So, the kind of history. So, weblog was kind of floating around the late 90s. It wasn't until the early noughties that you started hearing blog as a term, and there was actually a website called Blogger.com,
right,
which was one that sort of coined the whole thing. So we even predated that. But it's interesting you talk about communities, because the community aspect of DeeperBlue was really, really big and important for a long time. So we had this kind of blog thing, which was sort of mid 90s to late 90s. Very much, it was kind of very much personal stories, features, those sorts of things. And then we started up a forum, which was, again, the early days of forums, because it was just transitioning over from what you used to do, very much like AOL CompuServe type thing, which also had their own community sort of chat rooms. You used to have someone in the local neighborhood who would stand up a computer and install some software, some BBS bulletin board software on it, and you'd dial from your modem to their modem and connect. And it was actually an early way of you getting email, was be able to do this. It had a whole system of being able to send emails through all this stuff, and that then moved onto the web. And we were one of the early ones in the diving world to do that. And we set up a forum in 99, and it just exploded. It was predominantly around freediving at the time rather than scuba diving. And for the life of me, I don't remember why it was that took on a life of its own as opposed to scuba diving. But we covered everything. But the forums in particular were very, very freediving orientated.
Oh, wow.
So, and this was, again, this is probably the early days of the resurgence of modern freediving, as opposed to kind of the sort of older versions of freediving that exist.
Sure.
So we had hundreds of thousands of people a month looking at the forums, commenting on the forums, posting. We had people who now are world champion freedivers. The one I always quote is William Trubridge. And he was a very early adopter. This was now probably 2005-ish, and he was typing on the one of his first posts was, "Hi, I'm William. I'm a New Zealand guy. I'm just getting into freediving. Do you have any suggestions around courses to do?" and that sort of stuff. And the community all waded in. And then a little bit of time later, he then posted and said, "Does anyone know anything about Dean's Blue Hole?" And of course, Dean's Blue Hole is now where he bases himself, and where Vertical Blue, which is kind of the Wimbledon of freediving championships, is held every year. That's his home, that's his base, that's where he set most of his world records. That's where he holds probably one of the pinnacle of freediving competitions is held there. And it started off with a post on DeeperBlue, which is, does anyone know anything about this place called Dean's Blue Hole in the Bahamas?
In DeeperBlue, I mean, it covers freediving, scuba diving, travel, ocean advocacy, all of those things. But it's interesting that freediving was there from the beginning. In my mind, I was thinking it was scuba diving, but freediving has been there from the beginning. Stephen, how has DeeperBlue evolved over the years? I mean, this got its roots back in the mid 1990s, and evolving and staying relevant, that is not easy. And how have you been able to kind of steer that ship to keep it relevant?
Yeah, great question. So, I mean, we've adapted over time, and I think one of the things I've seen a lot of, competitors, so to speak, come and go over the years, and even now, we do a lot of tracking as to who our competitors are and how they're doing versus us and all this sort of stuff. And if you look at the history of DeeperBlue, so we talked about blog, personal stories beginning, then community was massive for about 10 years. It was before, this was before social media, right? So this was I did a talk back in January in a freediving conference in Florida, in fact.
Oh, yeah.
I was, and I talked about it. I talked about, the difference between when I started DeeperBlue and people were engaged and doing things to now. So back then, what people would do is they'd wake up in the morning and they'd brush their teeth and get ready for work and say good morning to their flatmates or their family or whatever it is, and have a cup of coffee and drive to or get on the train to work. They'd probably have another cup of coffee and do something, and then they do probably half a day's work, and they get lunchtime and say, right, I'm probably now going to look at something I'm interested in. They use their corporate computer to go and look at something, and they'd log on to, if they're interested in diving, DeeperBlue. And they go, and they chat a bit, and then they go about their day, probably for another 4 or 5 hours, go home, say goodnight to people, whatever it is. And if they were lucky enough to have a computer at home in those days, they'd log on maybe to DeeperBlue a second time and answer some more stuff or read some more stuff and so on. That's changed now. Someone wakes up, rolls over, picks up their phone and scrolls to whichever social media site they're looking at. It's the time to information and time to interaction on your favorite stuff is it is almost zero now. So it's a very, very different world. So we've had to adapt with all those changes over years. So before social media was a thing, we were forums, and that was the big thing. We still had editorial that we were doing, mainly features again, kind of, what was it? So the late noughties, so this is 2008, 2009, we're starting to pivot back to more editorial content again. We bolstered up we shifted from features to more news at the time. And we then also started our journey into more social media, activity as well. So we started up on Facebook. Twitter was a thing by this point. And then we grew from that, and we've always adapted. So if you look now today, what we do versus what some of the other people who are no longer around in the media community for the diving industry, or ones that are still successful, we've always diversified. So we still have the forums, we still do editorial, we do both long form features, we do timely news content. We have an app, so we have, I think, 30,000 people who've downloaded the app and using the app to interact with us. We have over 1 million people following us on social media of different ways, so Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. TikTok is somewhat new. It's not that new, but it's somewhat new, and we're on there, and YouTube, and we tend to adapt with all these different platforms that come along. Email still is king. We still email lots of people, get a lot of traffic on a Friday when our newsletter goes out, those sorts of things. So it's really just about the way I describe it is always being there with where your audience is, and the way they interact about stuff, and it's also a generational thing. So, Instagram, TikTok, those sorts of things are much more the way young people consume content these days. I mean, you could even go to things like Snapchat and those sorts of things. Much harder to interact as a media organization on those sorts of channels. But the sort of content that we put out on TikTok and Instagram is very different to the type of content we put out on Facebook or Twitter.
Are you doing dances on TikTok with your gear, with your kit?
No,
that's disappointing.
No.
I will not be subscribing.
That's okay. But what we will do is we do have other people who are probably more suited to being in front of the camera than I am doing that sort of stuff. I have a face for radio, is the way I describe it. So look, it is really about interacting with people and the way they want the content to be to be consumed, and people consume things very differently depending on what medium and what age they are.
Well,
so that's how we've done longevity.
There's a lot more people vying for attention now too, and so to keep up with all of that has got to be. You've got to keep things organized, and you've got to be able to stay relevant, and that's a skill in of itself. And
also you go to different trade shows, and I mean, you go to DEMA, which is the big scuba diving trade show that happens every year. For the most part, where COVID, I don't know, there wasn't much happening there then, but you seem to keep up with the industry as well, not only with the media that people are consuming, but you've got, and I think that's important for, somebody that is going to start a site like this. I mean, you've got like a niche site, you have got to stay up with it, and you've got to stay current with what is going on. And you've done, I mean, I think it's probably been out of passion because you love the sport. And that's important too, but that's how it seems like that's how you've kept it relevant as well.
Yeah, I kept it relevant. I mean, the industry angle is really important. As fundamentally a news organization, that is what we are. We're reliant on the industry to give us news. There's only so many non-industry things that you can do. Now, we're B2C, so we're a consumer-facing publication. We're all about helping inspire people, educate people about the beauty of the underwater world and scuba diving, freediving, and traveling, and all those sorts of different things. So to be able to do that, we rely on our industry partners for a couple of things. One is content, so we rely on them to when something we go to DEMA, for example. We've always been to DEMA about covering. At the time when we started, it was just to go and network with some industry people, but it very rapidly evolved from a couple. We first time we went was 2002. By 2004, we were full time covering the show, in very much as like the tech industry, has big. E3 used to be a big show. CES used to be a big show. These are multi-hall shows in big places like Las Vegas and so on, and the media would go and cover from a consumer angle. Although it's a trade show, an industry show, they go and cover it as if for consumers to say, hey, look, this is the stuff that's coming next year. By the time you get to July next year, you're going to be able to buy this cool widget that's going to do something amazing and transform your life. Same sort of thing from a diving perspective. That's how we would approach it. At the same time, it helps me build my network and get to know other people in the industry. And I'm not really a shy retiring character. I'm fairly loud and gregarious type character. So I may be seen in several bars on occasion, out and about, hosting parties and events and those sorts of things, which also helps, with the people recognizing who you are and what you do. We actually had a real big image problem for many, many years because we're fundamentally a US centric news editorial site and community. For most of our existence, 40 to 50% of our audience comes from North America. But I'm British, right? So everyone in America would be like, oh, well, that British diving website that all the Brits look at, DeeperBlue. And all the Europeans would be like, oh, you mean that American website that all the Americans look at? So it took a long time. It took probably, it was probably 2013, 2014 before we managed to crack that nut. And that's after going year after year and engaging and talking to people and, educating them about what we are. And, also the diving industry is really not that technologically forward looking. If you fundamentally look at what a scuba tank and a regulator is, it's the same thing that was invented 40, 50 years ago, right? It's the same technology then as it is today. So it's the same thing. It's taken them a long time to get up the technology curve and understand what it is as a media organization we can do. I still have almost nightmares of trying to persuade someone to buy some advertising on the website, which again is our primary source of income. And then they're going, well, this sounds really interesting. Tell me how I'm going to buy my quarter page advert in your print magazine. And I'm like, have you not heard when I said we are completely digital? There is no such thing as a print magazine. And we don't do this sort of quarter page type thing and so on. They were like, I don't understand any of this. Doesn't make any sense to me. That was still a conversation we're having probably 10, 12 years ago.
Wow.
With major people in the organization.
Wow. And I think with people listening would be very interested to know that with all of this you're talking about and the multiple places you're posting for social media and the articles you're writing and contributors, that this is not your full-time job.
Yeah.
I mean, it is, but it's not, right? Like you have a day job on top of a day job.
I do. So, and that's very purposeful, actually. And I'll explain why. So I work I suppose my primary job would be in the tech industry. So I've worked for a number of SaaS companies. I currently lead a very large sales team looking after one of the world's largest banks for a software company. So that's kind of what I do. I've always been in the technology space, both the techie bit, the consulting, developing stuff bit, but also in the last half of my tech career, it's always been in the sales sort of client relationship side of things. So it's really fulfilling, rewarding career. It's a people-centric career, which I love. The DeeperBlue side of things has always been kind of the secondary career. I never treat it like that. I treat it very seriously. It's it is a corporation in its own right. It earns, it runs money. It has an accountant. It has a team of people who do stuff. It is a business, fully fledged business in its own right. The reason that I've always kept it as a sort of side, hobby with a bank account would be I think the latest thing is called a side hustle. I think is what
yes, I would
what those kids these days.
This is more than a hobby. You're clearly devoting. I mean, diving is a hobby. You've ramped it up a little bit.
Yeah, and look, I have a team. Overall, there's over 300 people involved in the site, and they're not all paid. There's a fraction of those who are paid, but there's paid staff, there's volunteer staff, there's part-time staff, there's all sorts of different types who are involved to keep the ship running. I'm still very much involved in. I actually tinker around with the techie bits. I quite enjoy the techie behind the scenes bits. So if something breaks, if you ever go on DeeperBlue.com and it's not working, just send me an email. I'm the one who goes and fixes it generally. So, and I also do all the business stuff. So all the main building of relationships in the industry. I often set the pace around strategy. I do all the stuff around advertising. So the typical roles that a publisher would take in a traditional media organization, the sort of role that I fulfill for DeeperBlue. But the reason it's always been that way, rather than being my full-time job and rather than me having a secondary sort of full-time day job, is very much around giving other people the opportunity to do stuff. So if I had to take it's a very good going concern, but if I had to work full-time and take the same sort of salary out that I take out from my tech salary, I wouldn't be able to afford many people to do stuff. So I've taken always the opportunity to say, look, this is about giving lots and lots of people. I particularly I enjoy hiring and working with young people. Robbie's been at the Dima show, part of the team. He very gratefully, I'm not sure whether it's stupidity or gratefully, joined the team in November.
The man
I'm not
had a ball.
sure
He had a ball. I was just looking where the next DEMA show is. It's New Orleans. Don't know if you can get there, babe. Sorry.
It is.
Yeah, maybe we'll see.
Yes, the emails come out about July time saying to the whole anyone who's been involved, because again, a lot of those people. So it's a volunteer. So this is. I'm very proud of the team around. We talk about Team DB as the family, and it does very much feel like a family of people. And things like the DEMA show, it is a volunteer effort. We don't ask anyone to. That a couple of the editors get their accommodation paid for, but other than that, everyone makes their own way, takes their own time out of their busy schedules to go and do it. And, we soften the blow by doing things like group rates on rooms if people are staying over. And, I buy the occasional dinner and drinks and those sorts of things for the team. But it's people give up their time and effort to do it. And I feel very honoured that people want to do that and be part of this amazing thing that's DeeperBlue.com. It's not me; it's the site and the organisation that's become, which is fantastic. But yeah, I wouldn't be able to do those things if it was just me by myself working in my room. So that's why I've always kept two different parts of my life. And as it's grown and evolved, that I actually find that there's quite a lot of overlap. So the stuff that I do in the tech side of my life and the sales side of my life, when I talk about, I remember being on a conversation with a very senior person in Mexico, of all places, and we ended up for the first 10 minutes of conversation. There were like 20 people on the call, and the first 10 minutes was just me and him talking about diving the cenotes in Mexico, and when am I next going, and what's the stuff, and what a great, he got on DeeperBlue and thought it was amazing and all this stuff, and everyone else is sort of twiddling their thumbs, yawning away, going, what are these two idiots going on about? But actually, he'd gone on my LinkedIn and he'd gone and seen that I do DeeperBlue, and he'd gone and he's like, I'm amazed. I love diving. I'm a big diver myself, and so on. It ended up being something that we ended up having a huge conversation and passion about. And I also had another client who I got to know over a few years, who worked for a big insurance firm, and he actually was on the liveaboard back in October. And he's still my client. He's still someone, but he ended up sharing a room with me. I'm not sure he quite understood what was getting himself into. You talk about in sort of sales, sort of how intimate you are with your clients.
That was a whole thing.
I think that was a whole thing. I mean, it was separate beds, right? It was a cabin with 2 beds and all this stuff. But
liveaboards are pretty bare bones, or they can be.
Yeah, it was reasonably bare bones. I'm not sure he had a ball. He loved himself. But when I got back and I told some of my team, they're like, so let me get this straight. You went on holiday with your client. You shared a room with him for a week. You're really going above and beyond for looking after this client, sort of thing. I'm like, I didn't pay for him or anything. He's a buddy of mine that I got, he was into diving anyway, and I've just got him involved in some of the stuff that I do. But friendships have been formed. It makes an interesting sidebar type conversation. Actually, a lot of the tech stuff that I do in the tech life, I also can then translate. I get to hear and see about a lot of the current trends going on in the world, and I can then translate that and apply that to DeeperBlue and help keep it at the forefront of what we're doing.
That's good. Stephen, what is, as far as DeeperBlue goes, what is it that you hope that it accomplishes as far as a message in the industry, in the world? What maybe a legacy? What is it that is your vision from here on out for DeeperBlue?
So I like to describe mission. Actually, we never write this down. This isn't something that we write down as a mission statement or anything like that. But it is really to educate, to inform, and to inspire people. They are the 3 things that we want to do about the underwater world. And that can take lots of different forms. You could be a beginner scuba diver. You could be a, industry, long in the tooth, grey bearded industry person who, has been diving forever. It could be someone who, I've literally just finished the polishing touches on a a thing about a mermaid. How do you get into mermaiding? Because this is one of the latest things. Little Mermaid has literally just come out. I know that because I was dragged to the cinema on Saturday to see it with my kids. But there's a huge mermaiding and mermaid subculture that already exists, but lots of people are starting to get into it. So that's yet another angle. Our angle is obviously how can you use freediving and scuba diving to help you on your journey to do that. But that's helping, inspire people into, it's not, mermaids aren't these mythical things you see on screen. They are things, they are creatures that you can be, if you want to be. Educating people, making sure they're safe, could be going to a far-flung destination, inspiring you about some amazing diving destination to get you off your backside and off the sofa and go and do some diving that you haven't done for ages. It could be anything. So those three words are really important to me because they can be adapted to whatever. So, Instagram, TikTok, Instagram, beautiful images, TikTok, beautiful videos. It doesn't have to be just about reading a piece of content on the website. That's how that as long as we're doing that and people are still interested, I'll continue doing it and the team will keep on doing it as well.
What about from a ocean advocacy point of view? I mean, I know that DeeperBlue has that side to it as well. What do you hope that, and maybe that relates to just scuba diving in general, because I know that since I've been into it, I'm a lot more attuned to the marine environment and how important it is to take care of that. And so how does DeeperBlue come alongside of that conversation?
So really simple for me, as people who get to go underwater and experience the underwater world and all the majesty and the greatness that is down there and all the stuff that we've done to trash it over the last God knows how many years, right? We are the ocean advocates. We are the ambassadors to the underwater world. The fish, flora, fauna, mammals, everything underwater cannot speak for themselves. We are their ambassadors that have to, share the message. And, so much of this earth is water, not land, and so much is unknown. We are the best people to be able to do that. So that is why ocean advocacy has always been a very strong thread to what we talk about on DeeperBlue. And we don't do all the traditional stories. If you read a lot of our competitors, they just talk about, this latest regulator launched, or look at this wetsuit comes in another color this year. Those sorts of things, which are all important things to cover. But we also talk about important scientific and legislative stuff that goes on around the oceans, because that's also another important element for us to understand as ambassadors of the underwater world.
It's opened up my mind about it, just being in diving. I think it naturally comes. And the good thing is you don't have to be a scuba diver to care about it. I mean, sometimes, when we're at the beach, just looking for trash and picking it up. I mean, it's as simple as that. And I think it is an important message. And DeeperBlue's done a beautiful job of communicating that. What's next for DeeperBlue? What's on the horizon? If anything new, or just kind of sustaining the course?
World domination, obviously.
That's right.
Yeah, that's the thing. Yes,
we didn't want to bring that up and make it awkward, but the ones you're going to tell people about.
Yeah, exactly. Look, listen. There's nothing specific. I mean, we're focusing quite a lot on. So we just launched a content creator program. So we're working with some of the sort of up and coming content creators in the industry to do many short form video, but also photography and those sorts of things, and using that and using our platform to help, catapult them up to a bigger audience, basically. We're not the only ones to do it. Paddy do a good job of doing this as well. They have quite a good connection to content creators, and they're pretty good on socials and those sorts of things. But that's kind of our new baby at the moment, is doing those sorts of things. As far as anything sort of radically new, there's nothing really on the horizon at the moment. We're still, as an industry, still recovering from COVID quite a lot. So there still is a lingering impact around that. If I look at our revenue numbers, we're still probably 80-90% of where we were in 2019. And that's because we're reliant on predominantly advertising as our primary source of income. We are diversifying into other areas as well, as far as trying to generate. So we're giving people the option to go ad free, for example, by subscribing for a small amount every month to do those sorts of things. Like pretty much every publisher on the planet is doing those sorts of things at the moment. But that's really important. So they're kind of the main things. Nothing groundbreaking. Nothing. Nothing. Although actually, one of the things I'm experimenting. So with obviously the podcast, we had an amazing podcast for a few years over COVID. That's kind of on pause at the moment. But one of the things I'm experimenting with is some of the AI-driven stuff to be able to generate things quicker. Basically, because a lot of the stuff's news generated and timely and so on. There are some really interesting tools out there now that allow you to, through generative AI, to be able to create content. And disclosure needs to be really clear around it, that you're taking someone else's, my voice or maybe one of the staff's voice, and creating a script that could also be AI generated based on content that we publish, but we can actually streamline the whole creation process. And so that stuff, which is really, bleeding edge, really interesting use cases around generative AI. It's also quite scary as a publisher to see some of this stuff going on. And, one of the things that's taken up a lot of my time at the moment is looking at where things like Google and Bing and some of the search engines are going around generative AI, because there's been a massive shift of people using things like ChatGPT as their search engine as opposed to Google, and Google and Bing are trying to do that. And so they're generating search results rather than being generated based on listings of websites. They're actually going to use AI to generate the answer of what you're searching for. The problem is then, as a publisher, your content never actually gets seen by an individual, which is how you monetize it. It gets seen only by a bot who is using it to feed information back to the thing. So there's a lot of angst in the digital publishing world about this at the moment, that everyone's trying to feel their way around to see where it's all going to go. So that's taking up a bit of my time as well.
It feels like as soon as you figure out the target shifts. With the AI, and you're like, okay, we know what we're doing here, and then something new comes out and you're like, crud, now we got to figure out how to navigate this thing.
We've been using AI behind the scenes for years. It's been, the type of tooling around ChatGPT has been around for many, many years. It's just most people didn't really know about it. It's only become to the forefront. And it has actually really streamlined and sped up editorial process. And, it hasn't gone away from a lot of the key things that we do. But if we do have, a piece of content that's a fairly well-trodden piece of, topic to talk about, that there's lots of stuff out there, you can use AI to generate an outline of an article. We use that a lot to generate outlines for articles. So I want to write an article about, how to become a mermaid, right? One of the first things I'll do is go and use one of our AI tools to go and say, we're interested in doing this. What would be a good outline of an article for it? And it will give you the outline. Now, it's not always perfect, and this is where being human actually is beneficial. There's not many things beneficial about being human these days, apparently. But one of these things is using our brain, and being able to translate and work with the right tooling to be able to understand the best way of using some of the latest and greatest. Because some of the AI stuff is really, really cool and very, very interesting.
Yeah, you're using it for good, whereas high schoolers over in our world, we're like, do not use it for evil. You cannot have ChatGPT write your article, write your essay for you. You have to do it on your own.
Yep. Look, kids in school, right, are always going to find.
They're always going to find a way
to do it. It's like, it's like whether it's copying it from someone else or paying someone else to do it, or there were websites before where you could download pre-written articles or go and ask someone else to. It just happens now it's an AI bot that does it for you, right? But they've always found ways around it.
Oh yeah, for sure. Well, Stephan, just kind of closing out, what advice would you give someone? And I don't know where this is going to go, but what advice would you give someone starting out on building something like DeeperBlue, building a news site, if they were going to do it for maybe another industry? What would you say to them?
So I remember. So I'll use a story to describe this. So I met. So there's another community in the diving world called Girls That Scuba. It's run by Sarah, who is a friend of mine, or has become a friend of mine. Amazing community, amazing woman, Sarah, doing what she does. But I got introduced by. It was actually by Autumn Blum, who runs Stream to Sea. She introduced me and said, Stephen, meet Sarah. Sarah meets Stephen. Stephen's an awesome guy, done all this stuff in the diving world, blah, blah, blah. Sarah's just starting out. You two should just meet up. You're both in London or both in the UK, you should meet up, And I went, okay. So she sat down and she asked me pretty much the same question, which is, I'm just starting out. What would you advise me to do as far as building, a digital media empire, so to speak, around diving? My advice to her was, don't do it. I said, it is a lot of pain and agony for not a lot of return. The reality is digital content creation at the moment, and that's irrespective whether it's digital media in digital editorial, digital video, digital photo, all this different stuff. There are two pressures on at the moment. One is it's almost impossible to earn money doing any decent amount of money these days. Even people are generating millions upon millions of views on TikTok and Instagram and so on are struggling to monetize what they're doing. We are very lucky that we've built we're very well respected by search engines and other media outlets and so on. So we get a lot of traffic coming in. And if we publish something new, it gets ranked very quickly on things like Google and so on. So, we're lucky in that respect, but we've got 26 years or whatever it is, a good chunk of change, 25 years of backgrounds that we can lean upon, both from a digital perspective, but also from a traditional media perspective. So it's really hard to earn money and do effectively. I mean, the other thing is, and I've already talked about it, right? The what is happening to be found these days. You're reliant on what's happening in the AI space and where search engines are going and those sorts of things. So it's really, really hard. It's not that you shouldn't do it, because the things that exist and are successful tend to exist and be successful because you've got a passion for it. You just have to recognize that it's going to take probably a long time.
Right.
I've seen so many people come and go who start something and do it for 6 months, a year and a half, and then give up. I'm like, you need to be in this for the long term, right? This is it's a bit of an echo chamber. You feel like you're talking to yourself for a long period of time. I remember DeeperBlue starting out and looking at our stats, our server logs of where people are thinking. I'm like, oh, there's my mum and that's my dad and there's my friend from high school and that stuff. It's like, they're not interested in what I'm writing necessarily, but you start out somewhere and it slowly grows. And I see that on whether it's written form or photo form or video form. Same thing. Some of the digital content creators out there at the moment are doing some amazing stuff, and the ones that are persevering with the ones that succeed in the long run. So do it. Just recognize it's no path to getting rich quick, which I think is what a lot of people think happens.
Right. I think a lot of people think that happens in business in general. I mean, in any type of business, it's when you start, there's a learning curve, and we can vouch for that as well. You got to be committed, and you got to be in it for the long haul. That's for sure.
Well, you hear people talk about overnight success, 20 years in the making. It's never just that quick.
Yeah, exactly. It is. Yeah. And it's like, there's, if you're systematic and about doing things, you can often, and you pick up the right formula to do stuff, you can often speed things up, but there's no overnight success.
Well, and the market's flooded.
Not unless you're very, very lucky. Not unless you hit something that, we got a immense amount of traffic recently because we published a very short news article, which was someone had posted a video of it was a giant octopus floating on the surface of the water, and it looked like it was dying or nearly dead anyway, but it generated caught people's attention, and we got, mind-bendingly large amounts of traffic from people going on to DeeperBlue to look at this. It wasn't even our video, right? We're just posting a news item about the video and linking to the video. We just happened to be lucky. So if you had happened to start up the week before a Octopus Appreciation Society blog, that came out, and you could be super successful, right? Because you've suddenly got all these people looking at your site.
So some of it is, it's a lot of work and some dumb luck and a lot more work.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time, Stephen. How can somebody connect with you? What's the easiest way?
DeeperBlue.com is by far the easiest way. If you happen to type in my name in there, you can find lots and lots of information, articles written, and obviously my author page and stuff. You can find me pretty much on every social media network. So Stephan Wheelan for LinkedIn. People can find me on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, you name it. You tend to find my personal stuff tends to be a bit more private these days, because having been a little bit more popular with DeeperBlue becoming more popular, I tend to be a little bit more private about stuff. But you can find DeeperBlue pretty much everywhere as well. So it's on every single major site, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat. You name a social media network or a major network, you'll find us there. So absolutely go and take a look at DeeperBlue, and obviously things like LinkedIn. I always love to connect to people and keep the conversation going there. So if I'm on LinkedIn, and send me a request.
Sounds good. Well, thank you so much. And thank you for what you're doing. And, not just with DeeperBlue, but with the message that it puts out there as well. So we appreciate your time.
No worries. See you in New Orleans, Robbie.
Thanks, Stephen.
Thanks, Robbie. Thanks, Nicole.
Thank you for joining us on today's episode of the Sidebar Media Podcast, brought to you by Blue Bridge PR. If you would, please like and subscribe and check out some more information about today's guest. We'll see you next time.